Am I leaking somewhere? The time has arrived to start the off. And see, it's gonna be me and Susan and Reverend Steve that are helping with this discussion this morning. First off, I'd just like to open with a word of prayer. Gracious and loving God, you call us to many places in life. You call us to many things that we need to do to pay attention to your presence in the world. We are a community. We live in community. But sometimes we don't know what that really means to us. So help us explore this today and to discover in each other what it means to be community. We pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. So when Susan and I undertook the challenge to do this forum on community, first thing, of course, when I get an assignment like this is to go look for the definitions and all that stuff, which is really kind of a minefield because there's so much out there. It's such a broad topic. So rather than trying to pose as an expert or quote experts, I decided that really we are the experts, you are the experts. So here's what we're going to do today. Let's see, next slide. Do I have the quicker? Which one is it now? Just the. Okay. So the first thing we're gonna. Okay, I shouldn't need that. I'm laser focused. That's what does community mean to you? That'll be a discussion. We're just gonna do our small groups and have a discussion of it. Then we're gonna come back together and think through a little bit more about what other folks have said about community. The next discussion point would be, when has a community really helped you when you were in need? Again, we'll discuss and kind of talk among ourselves and report back. The third thing will be, what are the characteristics of a healthy community? I mean, we all look to ourselves to be trying to improve ourselves. What about community? What's a healthy community? And then finally, what can we learn about community from the life of Jesus? And here, Reverend Steve is going to talk a little bit about some of the perspectives he's gained over the years. So with that, let's talk about community among ourselves. Well, what is community? We'll give ourselves about 6 or 7 minutes or so for this.
Musical chair. I don't know against
neighbors. It could be, this can be a community, let's say community carpool, that's a community.
Kind of bring the Holy Spirit in.
Live with your neighbor, past, present, future.
It's like anxiety.
Could be anybody.
Work with.
Yeah, exactly.
Something about commonality.
Yeah.
Otherwise out there
But practically speaking, it's basically the area you live in, the work in what we're talking. You're the people you actually deal with.
How this now. I guess that makes sense. In these groups who care about each other and who,
It depends on
to
the.
some extent, work for each other, help each other.
You never did that.
Not just being in the group, but connecting on.
Interacting with
Interacting.
people, just simply being for each other, well, there's no community there.
Right.
People that you can, I guess, are community.
Yeah.
I think that was the same. There's, to me, that's in a community, maybe where we live that one last week, you know, and there, money for, she said, I. Down. This is what's going on. So there's something I don't even know. I'm just thinking, oh, that's right. Yeah, we had a lot of communities that we weren't. So probably ignorant that on basic things, you know, because we guys believe that. And no, and I think that's we taught one another. Something else. Yeah, something that's marginal. Yeah. you know, that can happen.
Yeah, but-
Absolutely.
That feels more community to me than the.
They were.
I think you're right.
But you know, makes sense. Here.
When you. Potential for.
So.
When you have police. She was elected, the greater ability to do land, that does make sense. But they said,
So
some of us, we however have a very aggressive side of others, so we do. Yeah.
My favorite one last year is
them.
2 houses down, Billy Brandon said, you leave your door front door open. We're not along the trip. I mean, one of the kids came in and didn't actually live right here. He says, you have to be in that. It's not in bad shape. You have to be in that.
No, this is people there. Maybe that's. Yes.
That's pretty much, I've totally disintegrated.
We know they ask about.
And they mentioned like a bear.
There's a good line. Made me think.
You know, I agree with you.
Interactive.
We had another. I grew up in. And.
It's not ChatGPT, I would just.
You tend to know the issues going on.
You could have side with them. And that's the neighborhood. Yes, we did, we played flashlight tag and different places. It was different. But that was very much a community. For example, when my brother.
You remind me of something that happened to me is.
In June.
Right, the car club, that's who we into the person, and so. We've chatted. We don't know each other. I called him a question, they can surround. He did so much. He was good at it. He nailed it exactly the kind of stuff I'm looking for. Ask good questions. You help me, I help him. He's trying to figure out how to do it.
I don't know, years.
So somebody can never sort of plot a plate.
You have a.
So that became community, not just an acquaintance.
Farm.
Small.
Neighborhood difference didn't happen.
Oh, my joke comes down to. East side. Our people, I'm in a conversation and easily they lose 3 hours.
West side, I think, they were.
In town.
We don't hardly talk about it because people live.
Same thing.
Aunts and uncles and cousins. All the aunts and uncles are gone. Cousins are dispersed to the wind.
Let's take just half a minute or so to wrap up, and maybe somebody can report out in your group. Or individually.
Siblings anymore.
What's happening.
And I think that happened in our family as well. And.
Okay,
The answer.
what is community? Let's go with the group on my right here, the Reichmans and. Kathy.
Well, we talked about the various types of groups that can be communities like neighborhoods or people you work with. Church, smaller groups within the church like the choirs and things like that. And then we also talked about what it is that makes those a community, and it's, some of it is having things in common with each other. Some of it is caring for each other and being there for people in that group when they need you. And we also mentioned that sometimes you can be part of a community even if you aren't like-minded or there are differences among you, you can still be a community.
Great. I hope we caught all that on the tape, but we don't have a microphone to pass, I don't think. So we think we're getting it all, but that's a lot.
Right up
That's,
there.
yeah, okay. Sounds good. The technology keeps evolving, and I can never keep up with it.
Well, if it can get my mumbling, it's really good.
How about this group over here with Steve and Chris? And Audrey?
Oh, this group?
Yeah.
We muddled.
Well, it pretty much covers what
Oh,
things
yeah,
we
they do.
talked about, so.
Because we defined it as people who gather together with a common, with some sort of connection or common interest.
Okay. Okay. Do you think that you all kind of have a basic understanding, like you feel like the other people kind of share your understanding of what community is? So it's one of those things that's kind of self-evident, yet it's hard to define precisely. How about the group here with Scott, Peter, and Sandra?
Well, one word that came up was support, community, as a place of support. Talked about even homeless groups, band together for some sense of support, perhaps. What else?
I said, like Holy Spirit, like there's a community of affecting force.
Okay, so we're bound in community by the Spirit. Okay,
I had said one of the things that when we first talked about it, because of settled in that, is that they call the definition of homelessness is the extreme lack of community and family. So
okay.
that's how important it is.
Another thing that came up in our group that I was mentioning was that when I was growing up, it was like community, and there's some kind of we don't think of it as community. Like my dad was a school superintendent, so we had the school and then there was the community. Or in the mental health world, we've got community mental health and then the institutional side. So there was always this community, not community thing in the way I thought about community before, and I don't think that way now. So from a survey, and this is again, I relied on AI for this, just for those of you that are not comfortable with AI, and some of you are, I know, it's really not intelligence, it's just a huge database, a large language model that goes through everything known and comes up with a synthesis of what other people have thought and written in the future. So it's not an intelligence, this is not Big Brother telling us something, but this is from an article published back in 1986, 4 classical elements of sense of community: membership, influence, integration and fulfillment, and shared emotional connection. And I don't think we have to worry that too much, but I heard elements of that in everything you were saying, that, you know, you self-identify as I'm a member of this community. As a member of this community, my voice means something, you know, I have influence. I need this community, and it helps me do some things and be some things. And shared emotional connection, the heartstrings, feels good to be among them. So. Another thing that came up when we were all talking about community is in the literature on community, there are lots of different ways of thinking of community, lenses through which to see it. So is it a place? Is it a bioregion? Is it a community of interest? Is it a community of practice? Like Suzan's a member of a community of psychologists, Maryland is. So identity-based communities, the LGBTQ plus community, lifestyle communities, I won't go there. Virtual and digital communities, intentional communities, workplace learning. Interestingly, they didn't carve out faith as a specific one, but that really kind of fits in a lot of ways in many of those categories. So when has a community really helped you out when you were in need? And this kind of goes to, why do we need community? So let's take a few minutes too and kind of reflect. I'd like to hear some personal stories about how community buoyed you up or helped you out when you were in need. Okay, let's go. 5 minutes. Or more.
I thought about this one earlier.
Well, no, other than
One
the
that
very last move that was,
Facilities.
every other
towns,
move we made.
Government agencies,
Had a
organizations
group
of any
of-
kind, they take on individuals who they also.
We know what things. Loading on other trucks.
They're saying retirement.
We could never have done it ourselves.
Contributed or never.
Exactly.
Now, church
You need to
reap the benefits of it. But the only one I can really think of. Is
You know.
mother was having issues with that. They her supply for a year. Good days, bad days, good days, bad days, were just the
Through some.
and when it's all said and done, she passed, I should have wondered how did I do so well?
She was raised that.
Consider that, I mean,
And you walk through the one who said, you're not leaving until that night. You're not leaving.
Times like that.
It's how did I?
You know, this last
more
move,
strength
we helped
over
ourselves.
I think it was the prayers of.
Oh, it was our great.
Giving me the energy and the
Here, lots of money.
Yes, indeed. 8,000. That part was really bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at the bottom side.
They really enjoyed that. And John right over.
Take care of it.
For another girl.
So it was.
I went out.
Speaking of faith, my brother, I knew he's a reliable person. I knew it.
Two of his high school
He's
guys.
the first person I called. Wow.
But
If there needed to be a second, I'd figure somebody out. I knew John would take care of it. He did. Wow.
My brother has kept much closer to going through high school class. I got sisters. Get together every New Year's Eve. So they just came and helped Jim. You know.
Yeah, it wasn't everybody in the neighborhood, but it was certain people that you made a connection with. You know, you trusted them, they trusted you.
One way someone was pleased with his. Positive and negative. But that back and forth much more. I have exactly the teacher over. From childhood. Well, three, Lori, but not so much. Two that I consistently.
To be.
One of our teachers, you called one of our neighbors.
And what's nice about them here in task is. There's a clear spinning. Yeah, second child.
That's the right order.
That's the right order. And called Bob. He made it come down to St. Paul. Well, 10 minutes late. It wasn't. I did that. But anyway. But anyway.
Quick interjection.
Yeah.
Time, your mom was getting taken from the house to the hospital, and I was coming to work. I used to be here.
Right.
And I had like 3 times distance to it.
Wow.
Plus I like. Sorry.
But anyway, my, the plan was that, and I'm so that our.
More than one or two of them.
They lived in St. Louis Park.
I give this Lori came over.
So, yeah. You know, check with the neighbor that we knew, and she said, oh, of course, bring him right over. We're gonna have a- and then that. Your parents know the mayor. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They are. You know. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The plan.
Because it's small group that
Community gathering.
Schools and the locals.
We're taking.
Because they people. We had kind of. Was also ranch. And it was.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I have some of my.
I got some of those days of depression. Yeah.
Always.
I forget the. Fake transactions.
Oh, yeah. That never has.
But so, you know, I'm up for 30.
Simply.
I would say yes, but that was, it wasn't about you.
And then.
Or something.
Like the hospital. And
It's about.
A year or two later.
Together. But then
At a similar time.
There was clearly a.
I said, well, you just rolled over.
I go there to fuck.
I said, can I go back to sleep now? She said, no. Okay.
This time.
You know, I'm looking for whatever. I was, felt like I was feeling like I got restless when I sleep. I had an opportunity to sleep.
But it was like that.
Yeah, beat up here. Was, yeah, there. We did it right. His sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then.
Again, could you kind of move toward finishing up the stories you're on, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, church and office.
Okay, who has a story they'd like to share with the whole?
I think we need the next slide.
Yeah. Just a prompt.
Syndrome.
Yeah.
That's all we're doing right now. We're gonna hear the stories and then we're gonna talk about other things.
Some of our stories came in it was interesting that all of us had stories about when our babies were born and how our community helped support us through that with our older children or getting to the hospital or, yeah.
Wow, nice.
And we had when my mom was sick. One of the best examples that I've always thought been thankful for was she was living with us and she fell and she fell going from her commode to bed. And I couldn't get her into bed and I called him. He was at work like 12 miles away, so there wasn't much he could do. But he called our neighbor who just dropped everything and came over and helped lift mom back into bed.
You said Ernie and Bert,
Hmm?
you called who?
Our neighbor. Our neighbor. Yeah. John. But he came right over and. Yeah, and just help her get back into bed, and that was, so we've talked about community being family and neighbors and things that you can call on.
I thought of in addition to that, when she told me what the situation was, I'm thinking, well, who can help here? John.
Yeah.
I know he's 100% reliable. Absolutely count on him. If it's possible, he'll take care of it. He did like that.
He was Mormon and he would serve anybody at any time.
He was really good at it.
And that's coming out of neighborhood community.
Yes, yeah.
And faith-based to a degree.
Yes, yes. Other stories. Peter?
One about when we're faced with loss, that community will kick in around us.
Yeah, that was my thing that came most to my mind is when my wife died, about the church I was in out in California. I don't know what I would have done without that support. Other thoughts? I know we all have stories. I guess they're similar in a lot of ways? Anything that's different, any different type of community that's gonna support, Carol?
Well, I mentioned growing up with school, how important school is for kids. All that peer, friendships and also pressure is really helps. Create, you spend a lot of time in school, especially nowadays when both parents are usually working. For me, my parents were both working when I was a kid, and mom brought the neighbors in. So she knew where I was after school because no one was home except us. Anyway, so the neighborhood, but school, and seeing that as a teacher too for my career, how much, important school is for kids, for shaping kids. There's more time spent there than families. Families sometimes have to struggle when the school has too many negative influences going on. If their kid has gotten into something like that, it's hard, yeah.
I think the communities that are built in school too, our oldest, when she was in high school, a group of kids met before school, outside the school every day and prayed before school. And that was a community that she had that was supportive.
To get to the next discussion, I'm gonna kind of skip over this one. But just hold it in your mind as you're considering the next questions. How is community similar to or different than family? Because when we're talking, well, getting back to the homeless situation, it's catastrophic loss of family, but also community. So is there a difference? How are they similar? How might they be different? And then for your next discussion, what are the characteristics of a healthy community? Again, 5 minutes or so on that.
No bickering.
No interrupting.
Hey, we all have skills.
Everybody being equal respect, no matter what it is. Child counts. Where somebody with disability, and everybody
Listening.
together. And everyone listening.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have all of these little girls that do have our stuff and other moms have been dying. And it's characteristics, a challenge, I think, because, I mean, is it better to just avoid, dinners, possibilities of.
Yeah, my soccer over there.
And then, it's question, there's different choices.
That sort of matches with the thought I had of family versus community.
On the reaction.
Is family might have baggage, so emotional baggage. Where with the community loves this, you don't know anything about my baggage, I haven't know anything about your baggage. So you tend to meet the person now.
We never had that.
You're actually in the.
Swimming for.
About some of the baggage like now, but in a different way. Yeah, that's right, but it's not smart baggage from decades ago, but,
Question, what is health?
What is the function? Yeah. Because I gotta believe this. More likely maybe listen to somebody else and they listen to their parents.
I have a question of.
Yeah. I think we go to this employee, I'm gonna get a refill with it.
It's almost a flash. Right now.
More.
Yeah, yeah, boundary.
Definitely. When we're group has got. They are a community. At the other side, there's their firm beliefs and thoughts. They are.
Maybe going some of that.
We have a real flash.
So it's great. How do you know?
Current administrator.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, you know, I done had money to do it, then, I don't know, you said, you know, because of medical. That's so easy.
I know.
He doesn't fucking help. Oh, how sure it is. You know, so it's. It's hard not.
And that's this, you go out. Or share it with me. You have. Was out. And they may have something, you know. So it's upset.
Yeah.
Hard. You see, or share it, that's a-
I'm not getting.
The exaggeration of the narcissistic.
Power, not much power.
And
Oh, well.
Okay, before we go on, I wanna do a time check here. What time do choir people have to leave, is required today?
No choir.
No choir, so I'm not for that excuse, so we have to worry about the pastor, what time do you have to leave?
22.
I did my own research.
22, okay, so we've got about 25 minutes, that's a good amount of time. Have a good discussion. So for characteristics of a healthy community, what I'd like you to report out are just one word things, so very short phrases of what a healthy community is, just start popping them off here.
No bickering.
Listening, yeah, that was first one.
Respect,
No bickering.
no bickering,
Or working through the differences.
working.
Sorry, that
Yep.
wasn't one word.
That's good,
Reconciliation, I don't know.
that's good,
Honesty,
honestly,
not,
Sharing.
caring,
not competitive.
not competitive,
Love.
love,
Acknowledgement of a connection.
acknowledging connection.
Support.
Wow, that's a good list. Let's see what, if we've got any. Again, this comes out of the Chat GPT kind of things. And this is all community, not necessarily a faith community, but a lot of what you said fall in this list. So we'll go through this really quickly. Safety, basic needs met, health and well-being, strong social connections, inclusive participation, all voices matter. Economic opportunities, environmental quality, education and lifelong learning, equity and justice, cultural life and shared vision. So those are the characteristics of a healthy community. But going beyond that, if you dive into the whole emotional side of it, Susan has some things that she's come up with that I think she'd like to talk about. Want to come up here?
Yeah, actually, I kind of wanted to do that second.
Okay.
Do y'all remember when Wendy V was here? She talked about family systems in churches and in that kind of a thing. Well, it's a kind of apropos. She, you know, her idea again of community, it's kind of like we're an emotional system. And just as in a family, members of a community influence one another emotionally, stress, anxiety, and calm circulate through the system, any system. When anxiety rises, say, for example, during a conflict or crisis, a lot of times people polarize, form triangles, or look for someone to blame. Patterns identical to what happens in families. They talk a lot about differentiation of self, the ability to balance individuality with togetherness. A healthy community depends on members who can stay connected while also maintaining their own principles and clarity of thought. Communities or churches that are more undifferentiated tend to get caught in being reactive, groupthink, or rigid conformity. And you all know kind of what triangles is. In communities, just like families, people often bring in a third party when anxiety builds between two members. So, so the health of a community, they talk about, depends on the differentiation of members and leaders and how the group manages anxiety, conflict, and change. And we're kind of in the middle of all that right now, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. We can think about that, how maybe easy it is to blame or something, but, so the goal for this, for Bowen, for this view of families, is a community where people can think clearly, manage anxiety, and remain connected without losing themselves. Now, the second one about that really applies to us, I think, is that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Henry Nouwen, and he views community as a sacred space. For Nouwen, community was where people discover their belovedness in God and support one another in weakness and vulnerability. The key task: practice hospitality, compassion, and forgiveness. Threats to community: competition, exclusion, and a temptation to hide wounds or weakness. The goal: a community where people accept one another's brokenness and help each other move towards healing and love. So that, that speaks to having a place where people actually do feel safe to show their real self. And how do we go about helping that in our church setting? So, any thoughts about that?
I think this is a great segue, we're talking about Henry now, and to turn it over to Stephen to talk about what our faith teaches us about community, or what Jesus tried to.
Thank you.
So these are for you to take home after our conversation. We're not going to sit here and read through those. I'm going to refer to these three stories, and I'm going to do so because as we talk about community going forward, and as the transition team begins to meet and takes its first step in talking to the congregation about defining community, sometimes we ask questions like, what do you think, the community is? What do you want from a community? What is the best community you've been a part of? And sometimes, and this happens even in church, we forget that our definition of community and our definition of a lot of things comes to us kind of as an assignment. So we will spend a lot of time exploring what Jesus means when he talks about community without talking about community. Because that's one of the things that we forget, that scripture talks about a lot of things. It doesn't overtly talk about most of those things. It tells stories, and those stories have implications. And sometimes we don't see that this story is about that. And one of the things that I want to point out this morning is that much of what Jesus does and says is about community. You think about his signs, his miracles, many of them have a communal aspect where he will heal someone. For instance, the leper he heals, and then he says, now go show yourself to the priest. And the reason he does that is that the priest will then declare him to be clean, which allows him to be received back into community. And without that declaration, he will not be received in community. And the way in which he is most suffering is that he's an outcast, right? So many of Jesus' stories are about that. And I picked up three here where Jesus kind of talks about different aspects of community. And one of them is a story about Jesus and his disciples walking along. And there is a blind man that keeps yelling out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me, right? And the people who are with Jesus in the crowd are looking at the man saying, will you just shut up, right? I mean, he's trying to do stuff, he's trying to talk to us, we're trying to hear, just shut up. But he keeps saying, Jesus, son of David, have mercy, a blind man, right? And so Jesus comes up to him and he asks him the dumbest question in the world. What do you want me to do for you? Why would I say it's the dumbest question in the world?
He's blind.
Because he's blind. I mean, it's obvious what he needs, right?
But Jesus was humble enough to ask him what he wanted, not
Yes.
presume what he wanted.
Right. In my sermon this morning, one of the things that I said is that in the indigenous community, you don't operate in relationship with people kind of according to your own definition or sense of what they need from you. You always operate with people on the basis of wanting to know what their needs are, right? And then you meet their needs. So really it is, from our perspective, a stupid question, because of course a blind man wants to see. Until we stop and think, well, maybe he has some other deeper, more profound need that's not quite as obvious and that he thinks is his chief need. In this case, he does want to see, and Jesus heals him. But community is about the respect of needing to know what other people need from you. And that's a hard thing because as Northerners, as Minnesotans, when someone says, how are you? What's our typical response?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Yep, fine, pretty good. Yep. And how do people respond when we ask, how are you? And they actually tell us.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't mean
It'll be okay.
that. I didn't really want to know. And when we say, I didn't really want to know, what we're saying pretty clearly is, I really wasn't asking you to be a part of my community. And community, apart from that kind of honesty and openness, is, I don't know, is that community? So that's the first story that I want to bring up, is Jesus asking that stupid question of what do you want me to do for you? Which is, I mean, he's the Son of God, of course he knows, right? But it's an incredibly respectful question. And community is built around respect and the need to know what other people need from you. The second story, the Gerasene demoniac. Community in this case is defined as a group of people that need to be protected from those who are problematic. So there is this fellow who is possessed of a demon, and the community needs to be protected from him. So what the leaders of the community do is take him to a seminary or a cemetery. They take him to a seminary, they chain him up, and they leave him there. Problem solved, right? The community is protected from this problematic person. The story from Jesus' perspective is that he comes in, he sees this man who has been cast out of the community, and the goal is to get him back into the community, right? So Jesus' response is to heal him, take his chains off, and send him back. And think about how often in our world do we define community in that way? As a group of people who need to be protected from specific individuals or other groups. Which is not how Jesus defines community, right? The goal of community from Jesus' perspective is not to cast people out, but to bring people in. The last one, and this is one of my favorites. This is the story of the end of the story of the raising of Lazarus. And they go to the tomb. And I don't read the King James version anymore, but one of my favorite parts of King James when Jesus says, "Roll away the stone," and Martha's response in King James is, "Lord, he stinketh." So there are these reasons why they can't roll away the stone, and then Jesus says, "Roll away the stone," right? I mean, just roll it away. And so they roll the stone away. Jesus looks at the open mouth at the tomb and he says, "Lazarus, come out." And the blind man came out, right? His hands and feet bound in cloth, his face wrapped in cloth. And here's the point when I want you to picture what's happening. We're going to do blocking. We've got, this is the tomb, okay? Lazarus comes out of the tomb. He's standing here like this. Jesus and everybody else is out here. And Lazarus, is wrapped in cloth like this, and he's just teetering, right? He's wrapped so that he can't unwrap himself. Right? I mean, his hands and feet wrapped in cloth, his face bound in cloth. He can't do anything. And here are the people over here. Here's Jesus over here. And the people are staring at Jesus. Jesus looks back and forth from Lazarus to the people. And he looks at them and he says, "Unbind him. Let him go." In other words, how many of you could have called him out of the tomb? I'm asking, how many of those folks could have called Lazarus out of the tomb? Any of them but Jesus? No, Jesus is the only one who could have done what he did, and he did it. How many of them can unbind Lazarus and let him go?
Oh.
All of them. Any of them. Right? So Jesus' response is to look at them and say, "Do I have to do everything? I've done what only I can do. Now it's your part, right? Unbind him, let him go." And what does "let him go" mean?
Return to the community.
Turn to the community. Receive him back into your family. Receive him back into your neighborhood. Receive him back into community. So I love the end to the story, that they all just look back and forth. And I think Jesus is just exasperating. You've called me here. I've raised Lazarus from the dead. I'm not going to wash the dishes too. So unbind him and let him go. So our role is to do what we can do. And a lot of our time needs to be spent in figuring out what needs to be done and what can we do, right? What can Jesus do? What can we do? What are we called to do? And we've got only a few more minutes. Any questions or observations about these stories, Scott?
The first story, I'd never thought about this until you were talking about it, but if he was bound in this seminary, the cemetery, who was bringing him food and water? There must have been a community that was at least reaching out to him for that, or he'd die, right? If he was bound. But I never thought about the community that was maybe supporting him, even though they were afraid of it.
Yeah.
Or maybe he broke the chains when he got hungry.
And then went back and chained himself.
Yeah. Michael.
That suggests to me that these stories are symbolic of communities that are exiled or ostracized, and so it's the whole community we're talking about, or the community of demoniacs, the community of blind and so forth.
Yeah.
What communities do we isolate ourselves
The
from?
homeless community.
Yep, what communities do we isolate ourselves from? Other observations or questions? Does this make sense?
Mhm.
And it's amazing when you go back and you start rereading again. The things that Jesus did and the things that Jesus said. How much of it is focused on Jesus bringing people into community and including them. You know, but my favorite chapter in the entire Bible is the story about the man born blind. In chapter 9 of John's Gospel. And really, it's all about, you know, these different adversarial communities and this one individual. And one of the more fascinating things about John 9 is that almost the entire chapter happens with Jesus off stage. Jesus is a part of the very beginning of that story, and he's a part of the very end of that story. And the rest of it happens with Jesus off stage. It's just between, you know, among the other characters. And a lot of it is about community. So I know, and we'll announce this at some point, but I know Scott, and I think Scott is even the one, Bob. Scott and Bob are two who are members of the transition team that we've created. And we'll spend some time together, you know, with this question of how do we define community? And the deeper question there is, how does Jesus define community for us? Because it would be really easy for us just to go after how do we define community? And then in large part, what we'd end up with is what we want, what we're used to. But when we begin the question with how does Jesus define community for us, it really expands our understanding and challenges us to critique how we define community. And to ask the question of what does God want community to look like? So take these home, take a look at them, open your Bible, take a look at some of the other stories, and ask yourself, you know, how is Jesus looking at and defining community?
Well, that was good. I had that conversation in brief with Pastor Steve before we put this together, so I had a preview of what was coming, but it still excites me to hear that that look at what Jesus was telling us. Just for your information, in the research that we did, put together a very, very comprehensive list of the characteristics of a healthy faith community that welcomes people of other persuasions. That I put that question to ChatGPT. It's a very interesting list to tickle your fancy. I'll give it to the transition team. Any parting thoughts? Any? Yes, Marilyn.
I just think, like cooperation versus competition.
Yeah.
It's just stuck in my brain because when I was working, staff meetings and lots of egos, and you know, it seemed so competitive. Versus I often thought, geez, if we could just cooperate with each other, because so much better.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to what Peter was saying, that the community is kind of bound by the Spirit, and you're not gonna compete against the Spirit. Another thing that came out of what Suzan was saying that I think is really important too is to be honest about our concerns and wounds, because we're missing a lot of what community can do if we don't give ourselves a chance to talk out loud about things that are really on our mind. Any other thoughts? I guess it's off to worship then.